Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by onlinegreatbooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas. I'm Scott Hamperick.
And I'm Karl Shute.
And today on the Online Great Books podcast, we're going to talk about crazy Uncle Art Schopenhauer, the Metaphysics of Love.
Do you think anyone called him Art?
It's been too long if they haven't.
Artie Schopenhauer. And I want to, before we get too much into this, if we are a little bit slower on the draw today, it's because we just spent a wonderful 2 hours working on the upcoming Music and Ideas podcast. We did one on Brahms that should be coming out next week, I think, and we just did one on Louis Armstrong West End Blues. I think you're going to like it. It's not us. It's Michelle Hawkins and us. I think it's good pod. I think you ought to sign up and listen to it. You'll like it.
That's right. It just costs you a click. Go subscribe to that thing. And go to onlinegreatbooks.com/OGB podcast and sign up so that we will notify you the next time we open enrollment. So we only do that about 6 or 8 times a year. A guy named Phil left a very kind review on iTunes, Karl. He says, 2 smart guys talking about books you never knew you should read. He says, interesting discussions and a really good source of recommendation for reading material. I was able to help my daughter with an AP U.S. History essay on the development of marketing in the 1920s because I'd listened to the discussion of Bernays' propaganda. Where the hell else would I have heard about that book?
Nowhere else. What grade did she get?
Yeah. Let us know what her grade was. And also, did you read any of that Walter Lippmann stuff? Lippmann in the 20s wrote some crazy stuff about marketing we might touch on. But today, Crazy Uncle Art's Metaphysics of Love. What do you think about this thing, Karl?
This is not... All right, so this is time for true confessions.
Okay.
So we got rid of our Netflix, but we do have Hallmark. And occasionally we get together because Hallmark movies are simple, little love stories, tiny problems, good-looking people. You're done in 90 minutes. And the reason I bring that up is because Metaphysics of Love is not Hallmark. It's about romantic love, but he's got some odd, interesting thoughts about it as to why it is the way it is. And it's not what you think. It's not like the exercise of, it's not your free choice of love. It's something different. I don't think you could make a Hallmark movie about Schopenhauer's Metaphysics of Love. That would be an interesting one.
Yeah. I want you to try to write that screenplay.
Well, so you have, you would have 2 differently ugly people. Okay? But with uglinesses that complemented each other. And then they fall in love not because they see anything in the other that they like, that the one person likes, that he likes, that she likes, but because the race itself wants them to mate. The forces of nature, there's a gap in the evolutionary natural processes. They need to get together. Their genes work together. They only think they're in love with each other, but they're not really in love with each other. They're following the genetic necessity of the species. Close credits.
Yeah. Maybe the thesis of this thing is that love is an experience you have that entices you, I don't know, to select a mate that would make up your genetic shortcomings, and that this force that acts on you to get you to try to complete the genome of your children is a will to live of the unborn child.
Right.
Does that sound like it?
Like it. And you think that, you think that you're making free choices. There's some juicy quotes we're going to get to from this, but you think that you're making choices, that you saw her at the coffee shop and you liked the cut of her jib, and you went up and sat down and, or whatever people do nowadays, you swiped right on Tinder or whatever it means to,
gross,
that you like her, and that you're choosing all the while but that you're not really choosing, that you only think you're choosing, that this is an illusion of choice, and that you're doing the species' bidding.
Where's the lie? Attraction's inexplicable, I think. I ran into Charity in 1987. Like, got to get me that Indian girl. I don't think I had a whole lot to do with it. And I believe that the purpose of these male-female pairs is for procreation, ultimately. It seems to me like the attraction is in the service of the perpetuation of the species. I don't think he's wrong about that.
So nowadays people aren't making babies as much.
What's the point?
I like babies. I like people that I like to have them. So if you're one of those people out there and you know that I like you, that I think you're a neat person, I'm secretly thinking, have more kids.
Our listeners need to calve immediately.
To calve. But, so modern culture, people do all sorts of things and they're not aiming at babies anymore. But that doesn't change your attraction. Your attraction is likely based on the same sorts of things that it used to be. So,
yeah, and I want to make this distinction that he makes. He's talking about a passion, and he says we might make other rational decisions about mate selection, but he's talking about that thunderstruck first thing, that passion. You might pick a lady because her father is wealthy and she's very bright and is genteel, but you may never have great passion for her in spite of your rational choice of a mate there.
Yeah, and the passion is where you're going to find this genetic necessity. He quotes from Shakespeare, "As you like it, who ever loved that loved not at first sight?" Mm-hmm. This is what we're talking about. For men, at least, I don't know. You love at first sight, or did you ever? The song, Some Enchanted Evening, you saw her cross a crowded room, and somehow you knew... at that moment, that's the lyric of the song. I'm mixing it up now, but it's right then. Or they do this in musical theater all the time. In West Side Story, which has an unhappy ending, but, Tony sees Maria and the music stops and all of a sudden their little ballet starts playing and everybody else fades away. It makes no sense because he's a Polish kid, she's Puerto Rican, and there's going to end up blood on the street. Then it's not going to work, but they don't care. They're driven by necessity, I think Schopenhauer would say, because they were going to make a cute baby that that the world needed if, they hadn't died. Yeah, or one of them dies. Spoiler.
He starts out here by trying to prove to us that love exists. He talks about people do crazy things. If they love somebody and it doesn't work out, they'll kill themselves sometimes. And the newspapers are full of these stories, he says. And, suicide pacts where these two young people with unrequited love will, do the Romeo and Juliet thing, sort of. So he starts off by trying to prove that love exists. And he talks about the insanity people are driven to. The insanities that they're driven to is proof that it exists. And he didn't have to prove it to me. Charity showed me in 87, whatever that was.
Well, who would you have to prove it to? Very sensible people who think everything's economic.
4chan.
Oh. Yeah. I don't know. I don't hang out on 4chan.
Whatever.
I have other places to hang out, other disreputable places. You could envision people that would think that love is merely an economic thing.
Yeah.
That we're just balancing interests and rationally choosing, and that love is no, love hits you like an explosion. I think it's the fourth paragraph, I think. Love drives a still greater number of people into the lunatic asylum.
Yeah.
There you go. There's love right there. And I would say this to classes sometimes. We're talking about when I would do the Aeneid, and there's a doomed love affair in the Aeneid, and just say, how many of you have ever done something stupid for love? And every hand goes up, and the ones that don't go up, they're lying.
Yeah, it's not rational. And again, the Schopenhauerian, is that how you say it? Love here is not the rational thing. I think that Charity and I have been married 22 years now, and I have a friend that got married. He got married for the first time when I had been married 19 years, and he's the same age as me. And we were talking about that, and I said, you're a more mature person, whatever the hell that means, than I was the day I got married. But know that it takes 20 years to make a 20-year marriage. 40-year-olds don't get married and then have the kind of marriage that 40-year-olds that have been married for 20 years have.
Mm-hmm.
There's a quality that comes with the quantity of the thing that maybe isn't rational, but it's not this white-hot, first-sight, passionate thing that he's talking about. I worry the less generous of our dear listeners might poop on his ideas because they're thinking about the love that their great-grandparents had after their 70 years of marriage or something like that. He's not talking about that.
No, he's talking about the thing that got my Lutheran great-grandfather to marry the Catholic girl. There's a little bit of a story. He got married to somebody else. He went to my great-grandmother and said, I want you to marry me. And she said, no, I can't. I'm not going to marry a Lutheran. Become a Catholic.
I prefer not to.
Yeah. This is in Northwest Illinois, Lena, Illinois. You talk about how you're from the soil of Oklahoma. We've been in Illinois since 1860.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to the farmhouse. It's still there. I wish I could buy it. Except that it's in Illinois. And I don't want to own more property here. But so he went and married somebody else. And she got sick and died. I think it was with I think she died in pregnancy. And then she went back to my great-grandmother and said, will you marry me? And she said, will you become a Catholic? And he said, all right. Yeah. And so the whole reason that my family is in the particular place that it is, in the particular culture that it is because of Gus's passion that drew him to this girl that was inappropriate for him.
Those shoots are nothing if not passionate, though. Long line of passionate men. He says that love determines nothing less than the establishment of the next generation. I buy that.
Mm-hmm.
And the consuming nature of it, when you're in that, it's preoccupying. The consuming nature of it is more evidence that it's the most important thing in human affairs, because when you're in that, you really can't do anything else. And he says it doesn't really have anything to do with the weal or woe of the present individual. As every other matter has, it has to secure the existence and special nature of the human race in future times. It's about the future. I think that's right.
All of that stuff in the present goes away, and you do silly things. I say they're silly, but you're following a higher necessity
that is separate from the weal and woe of the individual.
Right. And so I was thinking this is going to be a slightly scandalous thought.
I'm so excited.
Given that we have largely separated romantic love from procreation, does romantic love make any sense anymore? If I'm going to run off with the shop girl, it makes a whole lot of sense if it's because we're being driven by necessity and we got to make the perfect babies that the world will be incomplete without. Okay? Then it makes some kind of sense. This is what Schopenhauer is saying, I think. If you're just going to do it because you find her physically attractive, but there's nothing beyond that, then why bother? Mm-hmm. Why do the grand gesture? Pride and Prejudice is one of my favorite books. And it's not yours, I know. We'll have to read it sometime.
My oldest daughter's reading Jane Eyre right now.
Well, Jane Eyre ain't Pride and Prejudice.
I know, but she stormed the office. She's like, I can't read this crap.
I hated Jane Eyre. My daughter loves it.
Ugh.
You can guess which one. No, I hated that book. But Pride and Prejudice, I love. I love Pride and Prejudice. And I saw a web version of it. It's probably still on the YouTube, where they did it like it was a video blog. And it was entertaining, okay? But because it's a modern book, they get to the end. And this is a spoiler if you've never read Pride and Prejudice or any Jane Austen ever, so maybe you ought to stop listening now. They always end with a wedding. Okay? Pride and Prejudice ends with a wedding. Lizzie and Darcy get married at the end. Okay? And they got to the end of the web series, and because it was early 2000s, and it's the modern age, and marriage and procreation and all that has fallen on hard times, they ended it like this. the Lizzie character comes on the screen and says, well, okay, so as you saw, Darcy and I are together now. Together. You went 200 episodes on this thing with romantic tension and everything, and you end with together?
Right.
There's no payoff. The payoff is marriage. The payoff is little Darcy's running around. Otherwise, the whole thing didn't make any sense. So I guess I'm with Schopenhauer on that. Love seeks a completion, and if the completion isn't there, then it seems kind of silly to me. Like that line I just read, love drives a still greater number of people into a lunatic asylum. If it's all about nothing, then why would anybody go to the lunatic asylum for it?
Well, you're smuggling some stuff in there, which I smuggle in myself.
Did I? I'm sorry.
Which is that in the web series, they end up together. And then you say, well, in the Bronte book or whatever, Austen book, it culminates in a marriage. And to you, they're not the same thing. But I think for a lot of people, they're like, well, it's marriage. It's it's together. It doesn't work out. You get divorced and you be with somebody else. And I already lived with that other guy for 3 years, and we broke up. And then,
yeah, that's the way we think about it now. But that makes these great romances, they're not as intriguing. If you read Jane Austen and you don't think marriage is a big deal, you're not going to get it.
Yeah, and if you haven't done marriage for a while, it's going to be hard for you to know that it's a big deal. Like I told my buddy, it takes 20 years to have a marriage with the character and quality of one that is 20 years old. And you have to actually do the damn thing to get that.
Yeah.
And everybody that I have ever spoken to, they're like, oh, everything changed when we got married. Like even people I knew that were like shacked up, like, oh, you get married and it's different. And it is. There's something about it. You throw a switch. It's different.
Now you can burp in front of her.
We never did. Do people say shack up anymore? I do. We never shacked up, Cherry and I. But we lived in the same apartment complex, and I could walk. I had a roommate, and we lived in the same apartment complex, and it was 100 yards from her door to my door. And I'd get a little bit irritated, or I'd be tired of it or whatever, and I'd say, well, I'm going back to my place. Love you. I'll see you tomorrow. And we got married, and one day she said something, and I was like, yeah, I've had enough of this shit. And I said, well, I was in my place. I had nowhere to go.
Oops.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The good part about not being married is that nobody cares what you do.
Right.
The bad part about being not married is that nobody cares what you do. So it is definitely different.
Yeah, he says that this sex is the will of the species to create a definitely determined individual.
Whose will? That seemed a little fishy to me.
Yeah.
That's where I'm like, Schopenhauer, what are you talking about?
Yeah, he talks about this will like the heretofore unborn children. I mean, there ain't even a clump of cells. That these children that might come have a will that brings you together. And then he talks about the human race has a will that comes to bear. Like there's this whole mystical will. I don't know where it lives or what bears the will.
Yeah, I'm not sure how seriously we're supposed to take that. I'd have to dig into more Schopenhauer. I think probably pretty seriously. So I want to read a little bit of the quote that you just mentioned. So, on the other hand, that which appears as instinct of sex directed to a certain individual is in itself the will to live as a definitely determined individual. In this case, the instinct of sex very cleverly wears the mask of objective admiration, though in itself it is a subjective necessity and is thereby deceptive. Nature needs these stratagems to accomplish her ends. And I think he smuggled something in there. Nature needs these stratagems. Yeah. Well, does nature have stratagems? When Aristotle says the rock wants to go down, does he mean the rock wants to go down?
It's a heuristic.
The rock is going to go down. Does it have a will and make a decision like we talk about? Does nature have a will and decision like we have?
This is very Darwinian, right? I mean, I think that he thinks that there are forces that act and cause natural selection, and then maybe that force is the thing. I don't know what the hell he's doing.
I don't know, but that's... Well, look up his dates. Is he pre-Darwin?
No.
Post-Darwin?
I had to go look that up. Yeah, he's definitely post-Darwin.
There's a myth hidden in Darwinism. that there's progress. That species progress, and somehow the human is the apex of this. But if you are a strict Darwinian, progress doesn't make any sense. All you're talking about is a method of change from one to another, but not of progress. And I think he's smuggling in, or actually believes them, or is a secret theist of some kind, that there's progress and that your love needs to happen for this to happen.
Right.
That's one reading of this. Maybe it's just language.
I had an argument with one of our young friends, Karl, about evolution. And I said, evolution seems to be a thing we use to describe what appears to happen. But there's no force, right? There's no force causing paramecium to have a permanently selectable permeability of their cell walls or whatever. But on aggregate, you find out that paramecium that can deal with this pH better than other ones survive and whatever, and you call that evolution. But there's no force there happening. It's not an active thing. It's just a word we use to describe the statistical outcome of reproduction in a certain environment.
So Terry Pratchett wrote in the foreword on one of his books that all of the forces of the universe, all of the history of it, was designed so that a certain bald Englishman could sit and write stories about a flat world on the back of 4 elephants on the back of a giant space turtle. And the proof of this is that he is, in fact, sitting there writing about it, So the current state is proof of the past affairs, but he's making a joke, right? It's a myth. It looks like everything pointed to me because here I am.
Yeah. And I'm solipsistic and I'm the measure of all things.
Yeah. So is there really a force in nature pushing for this, or is it blind?
The purpose of every man in love, however objective and sublime his admiration may appear to be, is to beget a being of a definite nature. And that this is so is verified by the fact that it is not mutual love, but possession that is the essential. He keeps making these statements that bear it up, his argument, but we still have the problem of like progress and what entity holds the will. What entity has this will that is exerted upon our young lovers?
Yeah, I'm not saying that's wrong either. I'm just saying it's there, right. and that it might be smuggled in. If non-theistic evolution, if you're going to talk about progress in non-theistic evolution, you are talking nonsense. So if you're an evolutionist who's talking about progress, you are a secret theist. That's my claim. That's another scandalous thing that I'm saying.
That's a T-shirt we need to have made. On the front, it says hard pleasure. On the back, secret theist.
Yeah, you might think you're a stone-cold rationalist with no need for anything beyond you. But if you believe in progress, you're not. You think there's something driving it. And it seems like, I think he does. I'd have to read World is Will and Idea and dive into more Schopenhauer and see how seriously we're supposed to take all of this. Well, now, there's another bit smuggled in here. It's not smuggled. In this case, the instinct of sex very cleverly wears the mask of objective admiration, although in itself it is a subjective necessity and is thereby deceptive. Okay, so it looks like objective admiration. I like you because your neck is a tower of ivory, or
oh God,
I don't know, whatever. That's Song of Songs, I think. But whatever your love poetry is, my love is like a red, red rose. No, she's not. She's not a flower. But okay. And so you think there's objective qualities that you are attracted to. In you, it is subjective necessity. I've got to have her. And so he says this is deceptive. Nature is playing tricks on you. You think you like your nose, and you think that the nose is calling you and giving you absolute necessity, but really it's about the kid.
Right. I remember until we had kids that I really wanted to see what they were going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
Which jives with what he's saying. I just couldn't wait to see what they were going to be like. I couldn't wait to meet them. Couldn't wait.
And now?
That's a little disappointing. No, they're a delight. It's a delight. It is. The children are our life's project.
Yeah.
It's a delight. But I was really excited about that. What are they going to look like? What are they going to be like? Are they going to look like her? Are they going to be like this? Yeah, I just couldn't wait. And then he talks about how, I'll put words in his mouth, we have some sort of a sense of our genomic shortcomings and that we can somehow discern how the other person might make that up in us, then we can have this child that is the mean of our two genomes.
I have a perfect example of that.
Oh, okay.
How many tall ladies do you know that have as a firm rule the guy's got to be taller?
All of them.
Right. There's some limit at some point. In what case is it okay to have somebody shorter than you?
Male and female.
If you're a female, if you're a woman.
Oh.
It's unusual. And at some point, it's just a firm no. You know, if the girl's 5'11", she's got to find the 6-footer.
I told this story the other day. I want to tell it on my oldest daughter.
And I'm not at all thinking about Nikki Sims.
Oh, poor Nikki. My oldest daughter, she's probably 5'9". We talk about her prospective mate. I call him Dave. I've called him Dave for about 10 years now. So what do you think Dave's going to be like? She said, well, he needs to be over 6 feet tall. I said, I don't know. That's maybe 1 to 5% of the male population's over 6 foot tall. I said, what if the guy's 5'11" and pretty good dude? Maybe we ought to, think about that. And she says, well, if I'm dressed up and I've got heels on, he really needs to be taller than me. I said, well, okay, I understand, but, let's table that. And I said, well, what else? And she said, well, he really needs to be stronger than Mom. I said, listen, that's just not going to happen. I said, if you find a good guy and he's 5'11", I can get his squat up. It'll be okay. Let's find a guy.
I don't think it's going to be 5'11". You're fighting objective necessities here.
Right.
It's going to be 6 feet or above Dave, right. Whoever Dave is. Dave's out there growing right now.
Oh, so anyway, he says that this attraction is sort of inexplicable and that we'll see these imperfections in these people and they bring forth this passion, which I think is really interesting. I had a good friend that loved cross-eyed girls. He's like, oh man, did you see her? She's just a little cross-eyed, super cute. Huh. I'm like, I get it.
Okay.
Yeah. He just loved cross-eyed girls. I had a friend tell me this story about, he was talking to one of his friends and the friend's like, man, I just hate Susan. She's such a bitch, Her legs, she's like legs like a piano. And then later on, they ended up getting married. And they were he was at a party and he said, the guy was talking about how he just loved her thick legs. But earlier he had hated her for that.
What changed?
I don't know.
That's weird.
Yeah, but I filed that. He told me that story 25 years ago. And I just filed that away. I'm like, that's interesting. Something happened where the thing he had griped about was exactly the thing he loved about it later.
Well, okay, so love is not rational, okay? And if it's not rational, you don't need reasons. And to look for reasons is probably... That was that passage I read. You're going to think that there's objective necessities. There aren't.
Right.
Or at least there's not easy... You can't put them in a catalog. And we're talking about physical attraction here because that's what Schopenhauer is talking about. And Schopenhauer says towards the end, he doesn't think this passion leads to happiness. It's not what it's about. It's about the children. So there's a bit, for me, it's in page 5. The lovers have a longing to be really united and made one being and to live as such for the rest of their lives. And this longing is fulfilled in the children born to them, in whom the qualities inherited from both, but combined and united in one being, are perpetuated. That's the goal. But it's not necessarily happiness. Mm. And where the happiness can come in is when the passion... It's not from the passion. The point of the passion wasn't happiness anyway. The point of the passion was babies. But so this is towards the end. Happy marriages are few and far between, since marriage is intended to have the welfare of the future generation at heart and not the present.
Yep.
However, let me add, this is Schopenhauer, for the consolation of the more tender-hearted, that passionate love is sometimes associated with a feeling of quite another kind, namely real friendship founded on harmony of sentiment, but that this, however, does not exist until the instinct of sex has been extinguished. This friendship will generally spring from the fact that the physical, moral, intellectual qualities which correspond to and supplement each other, two individuals in love. I don't need to read the rest of that, but the passion that got you to leave town with the shop girl isn't necessarily going to lead you to happiness because it's jealous and it's passionate, but then that fades a bit.
And that's not its telos. That's not its purpose.
Yeah, its purpose is babies. Mm-hmm. But when it moves out, other things can move in.
Yeah. the guy that got married when we were 39, my friend that got married when we were 39, we were talking about all that stuff. And when I was talking to him about this, a thought came to me that had not come to me before, but I've held since then. It's that, you really don't learn about sex and intimacy, what you could learn about it, until all the new is worn off. The novelty is gone. You're subsumed in the novelty and the newness of the thing. And then that's the experience of it. But what if it's year 23? That's gone. You have to find out something that's inherent in that you co-create with the other person, because there's nothing else left, which sounds bad to some dummy that's never been there, but it's not. That's when you actually organically get to create something that only the two of you could create.
Yeah.
You can find the novelty in any novel broad, but the co-created thing that takes 20 years to do, you can only do that once all of those other things are gone. And so at the end of the book, at the end of the little essay here, he says that, this shared sentiment, there's something that can happen once the passion goes away that is good. But, a lot of people don't get it. A lot of people don't get to have that.
If you thought that love is, well, he doesn't call them both love. I would, but I'd say they're like love one and then love two. And
one's pupil, the other one's larval. And then,
well, passion's definitely love, but I would use probably Greek words. It's eros. Mm-hmm. It's eros that can become philia, or perhaps agape. I'll throw 3 Greek words at you. And so eros is that love of possession that's directed towards that which you find beautiful, and beautiful being the weird, not quite rational, transcendental.
Like them cross-eyed girls.
Yeah. I was thinking, are there lots of cross-eyed girls in Catoosa?
No, he wasn't from Catoosa. He was from up around your way, this guy.
Oh, okay. Well, we have a few more, I think.
I'm really interested in this idea about being attracted to these sort of these anomalies in the other person. I think that's true. The Japanese have this thing they call wabi-sabi. I don't know how you pronounce it. The beautiful imperfection. You can go look this up on the interwebs. You'll see that somebody will drop a teacup accidentally and break it, and then they'll take that broken cup and put it all back together, and they'll use gold to fill the cracks as glue. They love the beautiful imperfection. An aged piece of wood. There's this stuff in Japanese aesthetic. Once you've seen it, you'll recognize it in their aesthetic over and over and over again. I think that sort of thing is compelling for me. Every now and then you'll see a 10 girls. Or dudes, if you're a chick out there. There aren't very many of them.
No, I don't think they rate us.
Who's that?
Ladies.
Oh, ladies don't?
I don't think so.
I don't know. Email Karl about it. I don't know if they do or not. But guys definitely will rate females. Good, bad, or indifferent. They do. And every now and then you'll see a 10. And there's some 10s on the internet. Like you'll see them on Instagram. And they'll just be a 10. There's 7 billion people on Earth. Half of them are ladies. And how many 10s are there on the planet? It's the thin right edge of the bell curve. And they'll be on Instagram. They'll have 40 million followers just because that's what they are.
We talked about this with Marcia way back when.
But they're not interesting, though.
No, they're super beautiful. But I remember on that show, for me, it's like Grace Kelly. I think Grace Kelly is absolutely perfect.
A 10. You remember her name. There aren't.
But I'm not going to leave town with her.
Yeah, they don't elicit the sort of passion that the 8 might, or the 7 or whatever. The one that has the thing that tickles your fancy, whatever that is. I've got a friend who he met his fiance online. They were on Twitter, I think, and she is of a Middle Eastern descent. And he told me that when he saw her picture, he said, "I got to have that big nose girl." No, hey, he wasn't being funny at all. He is serious about it.
You want an example of the beautiful imperfection?
How about Julia Roberts? She got a giant mouth.
She's
crazy.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at her objectively,
she's a freak.
Right, but if you look at her, she's good looking. There's this famous actress, Jennifer Grey. If you saw Ferris Bueller's Day Off, a marvelous movie that I modeled my life after, Jennifer Grey has an enormous nose. She's a beautiful girl with look it up. It's big.
I don't know that it was big. It's perfect.
It was perfectly fitting for her. And then she got it rhinoplastered. And she couldn't work again. She was nothing. It was just like, oh, there's Jennifer Grey.
Then she was just another 9.
Yeah.
But there's something sort of nondescript about that platonic perfection in the human form.
For those of you who are grinding your teeth at us right now for objectifying, we're not objectifying. We're saying that the thing that's in the object takes on transcendental goodness for some other reason. And so you like cross-eyed girls not because of the cross-eyedness, because I don't know, but you do. And it's not rational. And we're just pointing out examples of this.
What would Freud say about that? Your cross-eyed girls. About objectification. If it's the at first sight thing, what else can you know?
But here's where it gets weird. It's not, if you put down a list of things that are attractive to the typical human male, and then you matched it up with the girl that this typical human male really likes, there's going to be some disconnect. And he's going to see that disconnect and the so-called imperfections, and he's going to think those are the perfections. I just love the way her canine is poking out past her incisors.
Oh, I had a friend that loved girls with underbites.
Yeah. Yeah, I love her little crooked eye tooth, you know?
Right. The more perfectly two individuals are fitted for each other in the various respects which we shall consider further on, the stronger will be their passion for each other, he says. As there are not two individuals exactly alike, a particular kind of woman must perfectly correspond with a particular kind of man, always in view of the child that is to be born. And then earlier, Karl, he says life begins not at conception. He says, we must consider as the origin of a new individual and the true punctum saliens of its life the moment when the parents begin to love each other, to fancy each other.
The twinkle in daddy's eye.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, that's what people say, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this was when you were just a twinkle in your daddy's eye. Yeah. That's awesome.
That's an expansive view of life. I like it, though, because that emphasizes the point of the whole love affair.
Yeah. When the love affair kicks off, the child is a platonic ideal at that point that has energy and is to be. It's really neat.
So I want to talk a little bit more. If you think that you are making an individual choice, you really aren't. That's why I believe that love at first sight thing, you see her and you know, and there might be trouble later on. There probably will be. But that first moment, that was the real moment. That was the epic moment. Mm-hmm. Where you saw her across the crowded room, and that was it. And you probably remember that moment, too. But he says, a man who marries for money and not for love lives more in the interest of the individual than in that of the species. A condition exactly opposed to truth, and therefore it is unnatural and rouses a certain feeling of contempt. We'll pause right there. So if you pick the suitable girl, you are making an individualistic, selfish choice. I think, according to Schopenhauer. That's when you're exercising your individuality. When you're swept off your feet, that's when you're doing the interest of this species. So he goes on, a girl who, against the wish of her parents, refuses to marry a rich man, still young, and ignores all considerations of convenience in order to choose another instinctively to her liking, sacrifices her individual welfare to the species. I thought that was an interesting take. So there you are, Romeo and Juliet, which is West Side Story without the music. Romeo sees Juliet and Juliet sees Romeo, and Juliet goes against her parents to take up with this boy. She's, according to Schopenhauer, she's not being selfish. It would be selfish to marry the rich guy. What's not selfish is to go with the passionate love. That's an odd thought. I don't know that it's wrong, but it's an odd thought. We would think less of her if Juliet said, no, sorry, Romeo, I got a big wedding with the Count of Montague or whatever. I forget. She's a Capulet. I don't know. She got a marriage planned with some Italian bigwig. And then she marries for money. At the end of the play, you'd be disappointed in her, wouldn't you?
Schopenhauer, there's this will to life that's the highest good for pairing. He rejects any rational calculus. I like that. If you're really reasoning through who your partner is going to be, you got to be real careful what you use as a yardstick. Is it wealth? Well, is that the highest good? Is that the best thing for me? Is ease of paying the bills? Is it intellect? I want to marry the biggest smarty pants I can find, and now everything's going to be a debate for the rest of my days. You got to be real careful when you rationate your way into this. You got to be real careful about it, because what are you smuggling in with your decision making?
Right, but I want to have you argue with yourself. All right?
Okay.
So we've talked about this before. A foolish consistency is a hobgoblin of a little mind, and Mr. Scott Hambrick does not have a little mind, so I'm hoping he'll argue with himself. So here you are talking about how the rational might not be the best way to go, and you're sympathetic with Schopenhauer's thought on this. Well, past Scott Hambrick said, hire the private detective. Okay, check out this girl. And that seems super rational to me. So, do we have them fight? Are you going to argue with yourself?
Oh, I'm entirely consistent. What are you talking about? on another podcast, I had a question and answer session, and I told a guy that he should hire a private detective before he got married to this lady, because so many times now people don't live in their hometown. They move from Marseilles, Illinois to the big city, and they don't know anybody, and they meet some gal and they date, and a lot of the old social proofs aren't there. Your grandparents didn't know her grandparents, and it's possible for someone to get married and only to find out he has $150,000 worth of credit card debt and a secret family. Like, these things happen. And I said, well, hire a detective. And I mean that, by the way. If you're new in the area and you don't know their parents, you don't know.
Yes, but the necessity of the race is driving you on.
Well, I don't know that there's necessarily one match, but I would say that you hire the detective only after your passions have been triggered.
Okay.
We're just checking our passion math.
So passion has to bow to the rational.
I think so.
In Scott Hambrick's Metaphysics of Love.
That's right. But if you start with the rational and there never was the passion, it's going to be trouble. It's going to be more difficult than the other way around, I think.
Yeah, then it's a contract.
Right. But I think if the two of you are passionate and you bring rationality to it, you got a shot. If you start with rationality, there's no passion, you don't have a shot. And if it's all passion, you probably don't have a shot either.
Okay.
I think it takes all the things.
So if you rewrote Romeo and Juliet, how would it go? What would the Scott Hambrick Hallmark movie be?
It's been so long since I read that. I don't want to judge that 1603 whatever drama by our current standards. But, I've got daughters. You've got daughters and sons. I think we want them to be passionate about their betrothed, but we also want them to be of good character and have all the requisites for, a stable, good life, too. Was there anybody in Romeo and Juliet among the parents that thought that the other kid was completely busted? Or was it just that they thought that the kids were not going to carry out the social contracts that they already made with the other parents?
Yeah, wrong family. Star-crossed lovers. The families hated each other.
Yeah.
Star-crossed Lovers, by the way, is an excellent Duke Ellington piece. He wrote an album of Shakespearean meditations, I guess. Such Sweet Thunder is the name of it. Sorry, we did a Music and Ideas podcast earlier, so I have music in my head. All right, I want to do another thing. I want to do a Schopenhauerish.
I'm still mad about it. You wouldn't have believed the hate mail I got for recommending that somebody hire a detective.
Yeah, that's kind of why I brought it up again.
You wanted more hate mail? I don't think everybody needs to do that. Like, I didn't need to hire one to marry Charity because everybody that we knew everybody else that we knew, and it was impossible.
Well, the instinct behind your thought, whether anybody's actually going to do it, the instinct behind it is marriage is a union of two people and a sharing of life, and you ought to know who this person is. And given our modern vagabond existence, you might not know. So how do you get to know? You're not meeting people at church. You're swiping right on Tinder or whichever way it is you swipe and you like him. I don't really know. And you've never met this person before. And how do you know the person? You might have to do a little more digging, and whether you actually hire the private detective or not, that's up to you. But how are you going to figure out who the person is? I think that's reasonable, unless we're just going to go with basic passion. All right, so I want to do a Schopenhauerian reading of Pride and Prejudice, because I think there's some interesting things in there. Have you ever read it?
No.
Oh, gosh.
I've seen the BBC production miniseries of the thing. It's all this character-driven drama. You know how I love that shit.
Why is it that I love Jane Austen and you hate Jane Austen? Can we even be friends?
I don't know. We'll just have to meet where Schopenhauer is.
So Darcy sees this girl. The girl's inappropriate for him. Darcy's a rich... There are spoilers in this. It's a rich young man, and he sees Elizabeth Bennet, and he can't help but propose to her. And he proposes even though he knows that she's not right for him, but she does it anyway. Or he does it anyway, and she turns him down for all sorts of rational reasons.
You're too good for me. It would never work. We're from different stations in life.
No, she's like, I hate you.
Oh.
I hate you. You say bad things about my family. So, but then...
Hate is not the opposite of love, as we know.
That is true.
It's indifference.
Right. Contempt. Contempt actually means I don't care. Live or die, I don't care. That's what contempt is. If you have contempt for the ways of the world, it doesn't mean you hate the world. You just don't care. She has all sorts of rational reasons that get in her way. And those all have to be disposed of through the rest of the novel when Darcy turns out to be good as gold. And then her passion comes in, which I guess was probably there. But she shortcuts it because she's being rational. Or long cuts it, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Darcy's the Schopenhauerian hero, and Lizzie's the one who's putting the brakes on it. Which I think also is kind of archetypal. I think usually it's the guy that sees her cross the crowded room, and the girl has got to be convinced.
At least it used to be the chick that pumped the brakes. But, what do I know? I was pursued the whole way, Karl. I was pursued the whole way.
Yeah, she was inevitable. She's like the tide.
Yeah. Schopenhauer in here makes all kinds of weird statements about how the intellect comes from the mother.
Yes.
He's got some weird ideas about how things are inherited. And he says some stuff in here about how love in the female is more constant. Where was that? In the first place, a man in love is by nature inclined to be inconstant, while a woman constant. A man's love perceptibly decreases after a certain period. Almost every other woman's charms him more than the one he already possesses. He longs for change, while a woman's love increases from the very moment it is returned. This is because nature aims at a preservation of the species, and consequently at as great an increase in it as possible. That doesn't ring 100% true about what I see in men and women, and I don't know that the Darcy and Lizzie story jives with me either. That whole chivalric, you've got to act a certain way and then woo ladies and stuff. I don't know, man. Well,
this is not Schopenhauer. This is me. I'm measuring my words here.
Don't measure, don't.
I'm going to speak in gross generalizations. So, send your letters to null, dev.null, or dev/null. That's a Linux joke. I think the women tend to be the civilizers.
Okay.
And the men tend to be the uncivilized. And there's a meeting not just of individuals, but of different ways of seeing the world. And I'll give you some examples. I would never shave if I were not married. Okay? I would never eat off a plate. I would eat out of the pot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? My furniture would be nothing. I wouldn't have any.
Right.
It'd be milk cartons. I don't care about any of that stuff. except insofar as Melissa cares about that stuff.
Right.
And then I care, you know? So the civilization is a bit of a veneer on me that were I alone, I wouldn't have much of. So it's a meeting of different ways of looking at the entire world. I mean, do you put knickknacks around your house? Do you decide how things are going to go?
I call those sit-arounds, and I do not like them. Yeah, I'm like you. I would have cinder blocks with a board across it, and I would call that a couch.
Yeah.
I would never take a vacation. I would use a spoon, but I would not use bowls.
In my younger days, the fridge would be full of beer and condiments.
Yeah. Mustard and beer. Okay, yeah. But what does that say about attraction, though?
It says that attraction for us is probably more, oh gosh, I'm passionately in love with you. And for her is more like, I'm passionately in love with you, let's make a nest.
Right.
So there's a difference there in the shape of the love.
In the biological world, we talk about sperm is plentiful and eggs are scarce.
Yeah.
In the mammalian world, we got to deal with this whole breastfeeding thing and the vulnerability of the mother and the kid and the infant. And it means that more resources tend to be pointed there. That means that the females are maybe driven to create more structure around themselves to protect that.
And somebody will say, well, actually, I'm a female and I don't feel like this at all. Fine. We're making generalizations, you know, so there's exceptions. There's edges of the bell curve. But if you're going to talk about things at all, you have to make generalization, you know?
Yeah, we could talk about Susan or women in general or Karl or men in general.
Yeah.
Are you the archetypical male, Karl?
No. No, I don't think so. I don't know. I tried to say that to one of the seminars. They're like, we're just a bunch of ordinary guys. And I'm like, I'm an ordinary guy. And they looked at me, no, you're not.
Right.
What do you mean by that?
He thinks that this passion, this love thing, he doesn't say this, but I'll inject it in there. It's some sort of a weird chemical thing that has developed in us to give us some sort of feedback that helps us make a decision for the good of the species.
Mm-hmm.
You push a button, you get your pellet. That's the pellet. It's the positive feedback we get for making the good choice, the good mating choice. So I wondered, because he says in the human that there's instinct acting in us. So it made me wonder, you know, is there something like that in other animals? You know, when a duck heads south for the winter, you know, do they have this jubilation? You know, do they have some sort of a experience of, you know, fulfilling their instinct properly? Like, what's the carrot and stick for other animals in Schopenhauer's world? You know, do other animals have to have the carrot and stick because they're not rational? You know, the duck's not rational. He can't say, well, I'm going to hang around here in Nebraska for another month because. Do they not need that?
Okay, so we were talking a while back about the gap. There's a gap in the human rationality where this is where moral problems come in because we can actually not do stuff. The duck never sits around. You never see a rebel duck. Or we have geese around here. You never see one that's like, screw migration, I'm staying here.
Right.
You know? You don't have roving bands of...
a duck gang.
Yeah. They all do it. So it does not seem... This is kind of our evidence for our speciesist idea that humans have rationality and they don't. Aquinas says somewhere that animals always do the same thing. Humans don't. We can mess with the instinct of the race to perpetuate itself, whereas the geese cannot. And so all of the drama of romance, will I, won't I, will she accept me, won't she accept me, do you think that happens in the geese world? They just peck at each other until the dominant male wins. I think that's how geese do it. Geese are mean.
Yeah, they are.
If they're on the path and you're walking, you better take a wide path around them because they'll go at you. They're little dinosaurs. for us, it feels like it's more individual than perhaps it is. This is, for me, that's an interesting idea that Schopenhauer has. You think you're making individual choices. I'm not sure I agree with him, but it's a real interesting idea that what I think are my individual choices are actually the working out of a genetic necessity.
Well, set aside the idea that it's a genetic necessity for a second. Did you have any sort of an experience of agency in attraction to one Miss Melissa?
No.
Right. So where's the lie?
Because I'm an individual. I make my own choices.
Oh, I see.
Darn it.
Right. So you have the experience of attraction, and that washes over you like a tsunami. But you do have the choice to walk away from that. I mean, I think that we are rational. We can do we can do what we will with it. Mm-hmm. But the experience of it, we can't avoid that. That's going to happen.
How's this for a thought? Rationality is what allows humans to screw it up.
Yep. Yeah, I was just thinking about, because we have that rationality and we can do differently. You say the duck or the goose can do no different. That we could have a anthropogenic extinction. Like we're the only animal that would just, other than maybe pandas.
Pandas are worthless.
Pandas and humans do not thrive in captivity.
Oh.
I think that's why our birth rates are falling.
It might be. Pandas are
the same thing.
A symbol. They're a corporate symbol of China. But they don't make babies.
They eat low carb, and they can barely even move, and they don't have babies. Yeah. And when they do, they look like a...
Kung Fu Panda is the most ridiculous thing, because no panda is ever going to move that fast.
No. He's got this proto-Nietzschean will thing he's popping in here all the time. Mm-hmm. It's awfully mystical and awfully strange, and I don't know where the will is. I can't buy that. But, boy, a lot of the stuff he says matches my phenomenology.
Yeah.
It jives with what I've run into. It's very interesting.
I've got this line right here. So if you think that you are making individual rational choices in your romantic life and in your family life, the affairs of the individual in their whole ephemeral totality are trivial compared with those of this divinity, well, that's a big word, which concerns the species and the coming race. Therefore, he, the individual, is always ready to sacrifice the individual regardlessly. Let me interpret as I read that. If it came down to you, your own pleasure, your own satisfaction, and that of your family, what do you choose? For the most part, if you're any sort of what we would consider a decent man, they get it and you don't. Mm-hmm. And if, therefore, it was about your own individual pleasure, it would be different. It would be, you'd be like, forget the kids, nuts to the kids. I'm gonna sit play Xbox all day. During a snowstorm, who drives the car and drops them all off at the door? And I'll joke and I say, well, what about me? Who's going to drop me off?
Nobody cares. Like,
nobody cares. Like, no, you're the expendable male. Yeah. Your individuality doesn't matter. You drop us off, darn it. At least in my experience of that is it's true that the family is the reality of which I am an extension. That it's for their sake that everything happens. And yeah, I do have the stuff that I like to do, but...
That's just because there's plenty.
Probably. If we're out hunting and gathering on the famine-stricken plain, I have one job, and it's not about me.
Right, yeah. You don't get to practice cornet.
Right.
I like a little of this. There's some funny stuff in here. There's things I thought were funny. He talks about beauty. We get a little window into the mind of Schopenhauer, or at least his contemporaries. He says the first consideration that influences our choice and feelings is age. Yeah, it seems right. 19-year-old guys aren't too into 53-year-old ladies, or vice versa, typically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, fine. But what about did it? Shut up. In general, if we can't talk about the general, we can't talk. Right. Second consideration is that of health. Yeah. we may care about somebody because they share values with us and so on, and we may make a rational decision to stick by those people. But you don't have that love at first sight with the man with polio. It's physical. Right. Doggone it. I'm sorry. People want to act like that's not true.
Whatever the current practice of love amongst the human race is, it was originally procreative, which means that your instincts, your cues are going to be, well, why wouldn't you go with, if you're a man, why wouldn't you go, if you're a young man, if you're any man, why would you go seek out the 65-year-old woman, no matter how attractive she is? There's no possibility of procreation there.
No 65-year-old dude, a given 65-year-old dude is not as attractive as he was when he was 22. Even that guy, even that one guy, because the attraction or the beauty is a proxy for health, right? It's, lustrous hair. Okay, that means they've had unbroken good nutrition for a number of months.
Yes.
Etc. Straight teeth. Strong, straight teeth. Plenty of calcium and phosphorus in their diet. All this stuff's just a proxy for health.
Yeah, it makes less, the further we get from procreative ends, the less sense it makes. And then, whatever. If that's not the game you're playing, then I suppose it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Then you can just be like, well, we're both into Pokemon Go, so it's fine.
All right. Saddle up,
The third consideration is the skeleton, since it is the foundation of the type of the species. Next to old age and disease, nothing disgusts us so much as a deformed shape. Even the most beautiful face cannot make amends for it. In fact, the ugliest face combined with a well-grown shape is infinitely preferable. We call that a butterface.
Gosh.
Like, she's pretty hot, but her face.
Oh, I never talk that way. I'm just wondering how two kyphotic gentlemen managed to procreate. I mean, not with each other, but
if I'm 6'2", and I have to hump over to talk to any of them anyway.
So it
doesn't matter to them.
You'd be 6'4" if you were straight.
That's true.
If your spine is straight.
Moreover, we are most keenly sensible of every malformation of the skeleton, as, for instance, a stunted, short-legged form and the like, or a limping gait, what is not the result of some accident, blah, blah, blah. And he says, we delight in small feet.
Yeah. I don't know, Art. I don't know about the feet thing.
He says, the size of the foot is an essential characteristic of the species, for no animal has the tarsus and metatarsus combined so small as man, hence the uprightness of his gait. He is a plantigrade. I like that.
Yeah. Geez. Darwin has some weird stuff on this, too, about why we find certain things attractive. And
the fourth consideration, Karl, is a certain plumpness. In other words, a superabundance of the vegetative function, plasticity. Here, excessive thinness strikingly repels us. The last consideration that influences us is a beautiful face. I tell you what, I'm with Art on this. I don't really like a bony lady.
I was thinking, what if he was writing in modern, like, barroom terms? You may like a 10, but if she's deficient in the vegetative abundance
and plasticity of tissue,
then you have to take 2 points off for that.
Oh, that's so good.
Oh gosh.
By the way, sunglasses and a ball cap on a girl, +2.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
I think if she plays in a band, it's +2.
Okay. Oh my gosh. So is it possible to be a 12? Like, she's already an 8. She's got sunglasses on and a hat, ponytail pulled through the back of the hat, and she's in a band. 12.
Yeah. Yeah, I've wondered what our listeners are thinking about this. But that's pretty much what Metaphysics of Love is. Metaphysics of Love is a couple of guys sitting in the bar talking about attractiveness.
Trying to figure out attraction.
Except that they're Schopenhauer.
Right.
And they're not being mean to anybody. He's not being mean. When he talks about the ugly, like maybe the two ugly people might have a passionate love if their ugliness is like alternate, in different areas. I don't think he's being mean. He's trying to figure out what this thing called love is.
Him and Queen, this thing called love. He says, a small mouth by means of a small maxilla is very essential, as it is a specific characteristic of the human face as distinguished from the muzzle of the brutes. A receding, as it were, cutaway chin is particularly repellent. I love all this specific talk. I love all this specific talk.
You could draw a picture.
Yeah. Oh, a tiny-footed, prominent jaw, little mouth.
You could have your daughter draw a picture of Dave according to Schopenhauer's prescription.
Well, here, Dave would be 30 to 35 according to Schopenhauer, because that is the age they prefer. Because let's see here, because at that particular age, man is at the acme of his generative power.
He's stealing from Aristotle on that.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Aristotle says something like that. 35 is about the magic age for the men.
He says, it happens that a woman frequently loves an ugly man, albeit she never loves an unmanly man, because she cannot neutralize his defects.
You could neutralize the ugliness.
Yeah, he says that children get their masculinity and their masculine virtues, there you go, from the dad. You know, if he's unattractive but she's attractive enough, the kids will be handsome enough. But if he's a puss, there's nothing she can do about that. The kids are going to be terrible, according to Schopenhauer.
Here's one. A slight upward or downward turn of the nose has often determined the life's happiness of a great many maidens, and justly so, for the type of the species is at stake.
The type of the species. He talks about that all the time.
Yeah, there's some, I forget the line, but there's some line about Cleopatra's nose and how it changed the course of history. Mm. Maybe so. And Schopenhauer would say, that's appropriate.
He says, people of extremely different temperament frequently marry for love. That is to say, he is coarse, strong, and narrow-minded, while she is very sensitive, refined, cultured, and aesthetic, and so on. Or he is genial and clever, and she is a goose. Opposites attract. We didn't do that. That's what he's saying.
So I was surprised at how much fun this book was.
Yeah.
Schopenhauer has a reputation, pessimism. You're going to go read Schopenhauer. Well, this book's kind of fun. As long as you take it in that sense, I would say don't take it too seriously. Realize it is kind of barroom talk, elevated barroom talk, serious barroom talk, but what makes this weird thing that humans, you've all done this, dear listeners. I'm almost certain you've all done this. If you think about your life, there's a couple that you know, and you look at them and you think, why?
What's she seeing him?
And they do, and they're passionately in love, and it works, and it's great, and it's wonderful, but you're like, wow.
What's she seeing him? You know what my dad says? Son, he must have a word on the end of it.
I'm not going to unpack that one.
Attraction is a powerful thing, and it seems inscrutable. And this is one man's attempt to explain this thing that we all experience, and it's so powerful. There is something animal about it, I think, Karl.
Mm-hmm.
We have to talk about that part in animal terms, at least a little bit, and that can be off-putting to our neo-puritanical society nowadays. Mm-hmm. We aren't attracted to everybody equally,
Is Gnostic puritanical a word?
Ooh, maybe.
Well, we want to think that we're a bunch of rational agents.
Yeah, we know the secrets.
And that the body is just kind of an addendum that you can dispense with or remake. But the body is you, as Gabriel Marcel would say. I am my body, and this attraction, it's you that's attracted to her. It's not your body. It's you. But I think I want to go back to the Hallmark movie thing. And no apologies. We sit around, we watch Hallmark movies. To the extent that there's drama in these things, it's because you can't predict. You're not supposed to be able to predict. The love is supposed to be somehow inappropriate. That's the dramatic thing, right? How's she falling in love with him? How's that going to work? If you don't have that, you don't have any, what's the right word for it? Frisson. You don't have any, I'm not even sure what that word means. I just know it's French. So the businesswoman, it's always like a blogger or something. She moves, like people make money from blogging. I don't know, but a lot of these ladies in the Hallmark movies do. Moves to the country and eats
a lot of peaches.
Sees the carpenter who comes in to fix her door.
Right.
And just falls in love with him, and all of her friends say, How could you do this? And then it gets worked out in 90 minutes. You get a nice ending. But that moment of how could you do this with him? I mean, how could you fall in love with him? Mm-hmm. That's what Schopenhauer's talking about. That's the unpredictability in all these love stories, whether it's Romeo and Juliet or West Side Story or La Boheme, which is a good entry opera. Any of this stuff, it's not what you'd expect and you couldn't predict it. Because there's something sub-rational, non-rational, right angles from rationality happening in it.
Right angles from orthogonal.
Right. Orthogonal to rationality.
I want to continue to bitch about the neo-puritanical society. There are attempts being made right now to try to influence what people find attractive. People with inspirational accounts on Instagram that are telling us what we should find attractive. People find attractive what they find attractive, and there's a biological component to that that's inexplicable. Schopenhauer here is trying to explain what it is, but there is this sort of neo-puritanical movement out there to try to get people to be attracted to things that maybe they aren't. There is a movement to try to get people here. Do I just need to put a name on it? Fat acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful at any size. No, you're 483. I can't see a long life together. You're morbidly obese. Your blood sugar's out of whack. I can't find that attractive, no matter how many New York Times articles there are about it. More ballroom talk. It's a boner killer. Sorry. Doesn't mean I hate anybody.
It's a biological thing. This is why I called it Gnostic. And if we were little minds walking around in a spiritual realm, which is without much connection to the physical, you could, I suppose, decide to like something. You could reach the end of a syllogism and say, therefore, I shall find this attractive. But this is where the rational human touches the irrational animal.
The lizard brain.
Right. And you're going to like who you like. And sure, it's going to be shaped a bit by culture, but only a bit. You guys could look them up. There are some studies on beauty, physical beauty in the human being, male and female. And there's a convergence. And you go from culture to culture and ethnicity to ethnicity, and they're still pretty much the same. There might be, different shades or something, but a beautiful woman's a beautiful woman, and an attractive man's an attractive man.
Yeah, you've probably seen these composite photos where they'll take headshots of 10,000 guys, and they can just average the features, and then this ends up being a very beautiful person, where they take 10,000 female pictures, and you end up with this, very symmetrical person with, frankly, completely average features. You've seen these composite photos, have you? And this is supposedly like, people find that very attractive. And I've always looked at those studies that look at those photos, and I thought, yeah, that's that looks like a healthy, vibrant person, but I'm just not that into it.
It looks like a 10.
It looks like a 10. Yeah, you want that attraction that drives the passion, is inexplicable. No number of articles or people telling us otherwise can make us passionate about something we're not. Not passionate about calculus, Karl.
You're not?
I'm not. And
it's so weird.
I think it's valuable, and I don't have anything against it, but no number of articles in the Atlantic can make me passionate about that.
This was one of my life sorrows, is that my wonderful oldest daughter is so bad at math.
How's Melissa with her math?
She's fair to middling. She can do it. She doesn't love it.
Right.
I loved it. I used to do it for fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a mathematician, but I liked it enough that I thought it was beautiful. That's the thing about beauty. I think beauty's objective. I think it is not, however, definable. And
you think it's objective but not definable?
Yes, I do.
That's a show.
Probably.
If it's objective, you can define it.
Nope.
What?
You can't. Why did he like the cross-eyed girl?
Because her eyes were crossed.
Objective. There's something there that he likes. Undefinable. Yeah. I like this show. I think it's gonna. I think if any show that we ever do is offensive to somebody, I think this one's gonna be. But I hope you guys will just that you, dear listeners, let it be your own thoughts. What's going on in human attractiveness? And the reason it might bother somebody is because it hits close to home. We all care about the thing we find attractive. And we want what we find attractive to be perfectly good and rational. And it hits close to home. So you might have to sidestep some initial discomfort with Schopenhauer if you read this book.
Yeah, if there's anything offensive here, do know no offense was meant.
Right.
By the way, I cannot offend you. You can only be offended.
What if I'm offended that you're offended?
I don't know what to tell you.
Then we just have to stop.
Offense is just completely personal and internal to the individual that feels it. I don't think it's possible to offend my dad. I've tried. You just can't do it. It's something you can only take. You can't give it.
Yeah, I think our standards probably are pretty low for that these days because there's not much consequences to being offended.
Right.
If we still had duels.
Oh, listen.
You wouldn't get as offended.
I'm all for duels.
What would be the weapon?
Sledgehammers.
A sniper rifle.
Okay. 600 yards. Sledgehammers in a pit. There would be a whole lot less shit posted on Twitter. You'd just see there was a duel in Chicago today where two men are posting on Twitter, and blah, 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 and one guy died. Like, that stuff would clean up real quick. There wouldn't be duels everywhere. You don't have to have a whole bunch for them to have a deterrent effect, Yeah, what happened to honor?
Honor doesn't matter if there's nothing at stake.
I think it's going to have to come back because there are these sort of swarmings that happen on the internet, and people can lose their livelihoods. If there's if one of these swarmings, and so there's starting to be something at stake, and at some point somebody's going to swarm the wrong person, and and that person is going to lose something, and some of the swarmers are going to pay. And they're going to say, oh, he was a crazy person and whatever. But, there's starting to be some stuff at stake. And when there's stuff at stake, there are consequences.
Well, perhaps we'll be more polite and less offended.
Yeah.
I think we don't even need to. Well, no, we should be more polite, but we absolutely have to be less offended. We ought to be able, especially in the realm of ideas, which is, what this podcast is about, ideas. You should be able to come into a room and say the most ludicrous things in the world with your friends and in the realm of ideas and talk about it. And if you change it, I guess I was being stupid. Thank you for pointing that out. Rather than, how dare you say that to me?
How dare you?
When boxers get done, do they hate each other? They shouldn't.
Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield have a podcast together?
I did not know that. Why am I not listening to it?
Charity listens to it all the time. Yeah, they do a podcast.
Huh.
And he bit his ear off. Tyson bit his ear off.
Well, it was the heat of the moment.
Right.
It seemed like the thing to do.
Yeah, I'm looking it up right now. Hot boxing with Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield.
Hot boxing?
Yeah.
All right. I'll look it up.
Yeah, Charity listens to that. She likes it.
That should be kind of a model for this sort of discussion. You could say what you want and realize that people aren't going to... If you say something wrong, the proper response is for the other people to say, I think you're wrong on this point. Not, I'm offended, how dare you? You're a horrible person.
Our friend John Floater.
Yes.
I last time we were together, I said something, and he held up one finger, and he said, incorrect.
And you just walked out of the room in a huff, and you haven't talked to him since?
Harumph, how dare you? And then he said the correct thing, and I thought, yeah, you're right. You're right.
That's perfect. That's what this sort of stuff should be.
I was a little bit rattled because he held up that finger and he's incorrect.
He's a big guy,
and I was a little worried, but he made it okay. Well, there's another Online Great Books podcast. Please go to Spotify. Go to Spotify and click on our show. You can hit share, and you can post our show to your Instagram story. Do that. That'll let your Instagram people know that you listen to us. And that will tell them something very important about you. Just that you're better than they are. And it will let them know what they need to do to be a better person as well, which is listen to our show. And we'll talk to you guys next week.